All right, I'm sorry. Several of us are eating. This is quite a long day. I'm going to go ahead and get us started here in just a minute. Come on up, Mr. Hess.
I can move to the front one usually here.
I'll sit next to this dude. Yeah.
All right. We are on the record. This is a work session of the Anchorage Assembly with the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission. It's June 16th, 2023. Currently 1:02 p.m. We're scheduled to 1:50, I believe. So, Mr. What's your last name again?
Kim.
Kim. Mr. Kim, you have the floor. Introduce yourself.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you all for coming and giving me a little time out of your busy schedules to talk about my agency. My agency is the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission, and we're charged with enforcing Title V, which is the part of the code that prohibits discrimination in Anchorage. And we're also charged with doing outreach and education for letting the community know what the law is and what it's about, and just trying to keep eliminating discrimination in our community. Because I think, as we all know, discrimination inhibits communities from growing and being successful. And we want people judged based upon their behavior, their performance, and not on artificial criteria about what makes them different, because we're all different in some way. In some way, we're all a minority. And, you know, just from a personal perspective, I was born in 1966, and I grew up in an age where all of the things that have been brought about didn't exist. And it's a huge difference, and it's a huge amount of progress. And I really support this on a personal level. So when I came on board, it was August of 2022, and one of the main criteria for hiring me was Keoki. Your agency that you're interviewing for has about 50% of its cases over deadline. And what are you going to do about that? Are you okay with that? Do you understand you're coming into a situation that is behind the eight ball? It's been struggling for years to get current, and we need it current. I said, yes, I'm very focused and efficient. And my problem is I can't not think about it. Once you give me a problem, I'm going to think about it and think about it and think about it and stay on it till it's done. And when I met with the mayor, after the commission recommended me to the mayor, first thing he said to me was, you're 50% behind. Do you understand what you need to do? And are you going to be able to do this? This is important, you know? And I said, yes, absolutely. I'll stay on it and get it done. So I came in and, you know, I don't like to make changes immediately. I'd like to see what's going on and learn about why things are the way they are. So I did that. And I just encouraged everybody, you know, all of the investigators have years of experience. They've been doing this all for a while. And I just tried to learn about what's going on, where are we at, and just encourage people. What do you need from me to get on top of this? And learn about outreach and things like that. And one of the things I did is my agency is called a FIPA. We work with the EEOC. That's the Federal Anti-Discrimination Agency. And the FIPAs are the like state and local agencies that work with them. And in my district, there are 9, maybe 11 other agencies. So I called every single agency and said, what are your caseloads? How do you stay on track? How come you're not behind? Or if you're behind, why are you behind? And then I also became a board member on the Association of Human Rights Agencies for the United States. There's only one association for all human rights agencies in the United States, and it's called AERC. And these are big agencies: St. Louis, Missouri, New York City, New York, Chicago, Illinois. And I asked them, how do you do it? What are your processes and procedures? Just trying to learn. And what I found is everybody tracks their cases beginning to end. They have different systems, tickler systems, tracking systems, spreadsheets, informal meetings, case managers, and they have expectations. Investigators are expected to work a certain number of cases. They're expected to close a certain number of cases per month, per year. And so what I developed for my agency was a spreadsheet that tracks the case from the minute it comes in, automatically assigns a 240 deadline date, and then automatically assigns deadlines for each process of the investigation. And it automatically sets up meetings with me at important points in the investigation so I can understand what's going on in the case, keep it on track. I also set expectations that all investigators are to work simultaneously a certain number of cases. All investigators are to close or process a certain number of cases. And this isn't an iron fast rule. It can be modified. You can come to me and say, hey, this case we're involved in, it's huge, documents, witnesses, we're going to need more time for this step. But as things come up, we deal with them to try and keep it on track, because the practical effect of my agency is often people will come to us and say, I've been fired from my job because of discrimination. So it's important that things get done. 240 days is my deadline. That's about 8 months. 8 months is a long time for somebody who's lost their job. 8 months is a long time for somebody who can't get housing because of a discrimination issue. And also, on the flip side, if a company, a housing development, et cetera, is being accused of discrimination and is dealing with my agency, it's a long time for them to be under this focus. They want their name cleared. They want, a resolution. So it's just very important for many reasons. We instituted this, got people on track. Last year, at the end of 2022, we had 53% of our cases over deadline. This year, as of May 1st, we had 47%. It's still unacceptable, but there were some problems slowing us down. One of the problems is we lost staff. There's a lot of turnover. We lost 3 investigators, so we were down to 1 investigator. But I have hired on 2 more investigators, and they have a lot of experience. I had to kind of negotiate quite a bit with HR to get the person hired on at the right rank and level, et cetera, because I don't want to be a training ground for investigators to come through me. I train them on how to be crackerjack investigators, and then they go on to better jobs. I want this to be the place all the great investigators come. So we're staffed up. The investigator that remained, luckily, is in the first quarter of 2023, my agency closed 28 cases. The investigator who remained, who is helping me train the new investigators to this system, she closed 24 of those 28 cases. So, we have the methodology in place. And once I have 4 investigators that are following this methodology, we can and will get on top of it. Something else I've been trying to do is, with this agency, we really want to get ahead of discrimination. We want to help people understand the law, because it's not always obvious. And some things aren't intentional discrimination. It's just not understanding. For example, if a woman is pregnant, that doesn't mean you don't let her work. She will tell you if she cannot work, and it's nice that you're being considerate and saying, hey, you're pregnant, I don't think you should come into work, but that's not really your decision. And so I want to help people understand the practical effects, because the mayor and the assembly, you've enacted this beautiful law that is so important. And so it's my agency's duty to get out in the community and help the community understand the law and how to put it in effect and what it kind of means, the nuances. Also, we need to let people know we exist, because of course, if somebody is suffering from discrimination or experiencing it, if they don't file a complaint with me, if they don't contact me, I can't help them. And a lot of people don't know we exist. And some of the people that really need to know we exist are our youth, our young people. Because when people go into the workforce, when people go into housing situations, when they're young and inexperienced and have no connections and networking, they're often the ones that will suffer this, especially in the area of sexual harassment. Sexual harassment continues to be an ongoing problem. So young women, when they go into the workforce, they need to know we exist and we're here to help them. That the laws have been set up to help them. The assembly, the mayor has set up an agency to help them, and what we do. But of course, they're not typically, young people typically aren't as involved in government and politics and law, et cetera, as people my age, right? So the other thing is, we have so that's one of the things we're working on is youth outreach. The other thing is we have a very small budget. My budget is $21,000 a year. The non-labor portion of my budget is $21,000 a year. So I look at that as, how can I maximize the benefits of this budget? And so one of the ways I can do that is by learning from other agencies, which is why I contacted every other agency. I didn't hire a specialist to tell me, how to do investigations or how to reorganize my office. I don't have the money for that, and I don't need to. All I need to do is call all these other directors, visit these big agencies. Likewise, so one of my first projects I want to do is sexual harassment campaign. Just letting people know it's illegal in Anchorage to sexually harass people. Don't do that. Of course, I've got a budget of $21,000, so I can't go out and hire an advertising agency and do all kinds of big flashy things. But I don't need to, because last year, the New York City Commission on Human Rights, who has a budget of $300,000 just for outreach, not anything else, just outreach. Last year, they ran a sexual harassment campaign. So when I was on the East Coast visiting relatives, I made a trip up to New York City. They're like, Keoki, we're happy to tell you what we did. We're happy to tell you what was effective, what was not effective. So I can learn from their campaign. Likewise, Chicago has campaigns. St. Louis has campaigns. LA just concluded a anti-Asian hate campaign. So I can take their information because they're happy to share. And I've been talking with them about, why don't we try and coordinate some of these campaigns? We all basically try and help protected classes, certain areas of discrimination. So we typically focus on a certain area each year, or if there's something going on in the world, we focus on that. So my idea to them was, why don't we try and focus it so we can pool our resources and share them? Because even though $300,000 is a lot to me, in New York City, with that population, it's a small budget for them. Their budget is actually smaller than a lot of the other big cities. And so I think with some really creative thinking and communication, we can accomplish a lot. And the other thing I want to do is spread awareness of Anchorage's and Alaska's achievements, because we are actually the first state out of 50 to enact the Civil Rights Act. We enacted it in 1945. And part of the reason we enacted it was because a young woman named Elizabeth Petrovich stood up to the Alaska House and Senate and just gave her thoughts on discrimination at the time. So we have a lot to be proud of, you know. So toward that end, number one, in terms of communication, right? I'm kind of looking at everything and saying, how can we communicate better? So this is the previous poster on anti-discrimination. And it lists out all the classes, it lists out a bunch of technical information that's in the code. This is my new poster, because all I want people to do is call our office. They don't have to figure out what class they're in. They don't have to figure out if the person that's discriminating against them is one of the people that's prohibited under the law. Just call me. If you're being discriminated against, if you're being sexually harassed, call me, because that's our job. That's why you pay us, to figure it out for you and tell you how we can help you. So I'm trying to make it easier. And one of the things we've been talking about in the commission meetings is perhaps making an amendment to the code that specifies this poster that my agency exists, be placed up in all municipal buildings. In New York City, this poster for them is actually posted in all businesses. So all employees know that the agency exists, you know? And so that's the kind of stuff we hope to bring to you in the future, is how perhaps you can help us let our taxpayers know that this is a service available to them. And I think part of it too is clarifying, toward that end, clarifying who we are. So one of the first things I did coming in is, this agency has been typically known as AERC. And this was our logo, AERC with a slash underneath it. I changed our logo to Equal Rights Commission, surrounding the Anchorage logo, because this immediately tells people who we are. And a lot of people ask questions. So I had because, you know, I'm just trying to think of every inexpensive way I can get our name out. And so one of the things I had done was I had a vest for my staff made and the commission members made, because we have 9 commission members. So they can help spread awareness of our agency. And we put the logo on the vest. First time my executive assistant wore this to the grocery store, 4 people asked her, what's the Equal Rights Commission? What do you guys do? So she told them. She gave out 2 business cards, 1 trip to the grocery store. Doesn't cost any money, it's not a big campaign. It's just putting things out there. You know, another thing is, for the office, I think it's really important to focus and have a mission and goals. And so I had Reprographics make this. And this goes in the center of our office, because justice delayed is justice denied. And I have told the people who called my office complaining about, hey, I filed a case a long time ago. What's going on? I get it. Justice delayed is justice denied. I was hired by the commission, by the mayor, approved by the assembly to get it done. And this is our mission. Anybody that comes into my office, this is what they see up on our wall. All the investigators, they look at this every single day. Every time they come out of the office, I look at it. We know our mission. So the other things is, you know, we have to be effective with using our money. So I've got some interesting outreach merchandise in my office. It's things like floating keychains for boats that have AERC on it. And I just feel like that's really not effective. So again, I talked to some of these other big agencies about what's effective. And so this is an example of what New York City uses. It's a tote, and it's a decent quality tote, so people will use it and keep it. And then it advertises, not in a preachy, negative way, but just kind of a pleasant way that they exist. And people like these, people carry them around. People ask, hey, that's pretty, where'd you get it? And then they tell them, and it spreads a message. So that's the kind of outreach merchandising I'm trying to do. And also, really, if you're going to educate people about discrimination, you have to start with the youth. So we have a calendar, a comic book that we hand out to the elementary schools about civil rights. And it's pretty common. I got New York City's comic book or coloring book, and I'm working on getting the others. But what's interesting is, even though we're the first state to enact the Civil Rights Act, even though Elizabeth Peratrovich is one of the first people to stand up against discrimination, it's not in our comic book. It's not in our coloring book. So I'm working with Reaper Graphics to design a coloring book that talks about Alaska's progress in the civil rights movement and what we did, and make it interesting to our population and our kids. One of the ideas we floated about approaching you and the mayor about is, I'd like to involve youth in our agency by perhaps having youth commissioners. They don't have a voting right, but they attend, they help us brainstorm on our mission and how to educate their peers. Because all of us in the office were much, much older than a lot of the people we're trying to reach. So why not get their help? Just like we have the Anchorage Youth Court and some of the other Anchorage, I think the Assembly has something like that. And I'd like my agency to have something like that too. We're also doing things like, I've reached out to the Anchorage School District to have a coloring contest about what does equal rights mean to you? And just kind of let the kids know from an early age there is such a thing. They might not retain it, but they often talk to their parents, and their parents are like, what's that? What is that about? So it's just really simple ways of engaging the community. Another thing we want to do is, we're in City Hall and parking here is a pain, and getting into the building is a pain. So we'd like to take our bi-monthly commission meetings out into the community. So for example, in July, at the next meeting, we want to have that in Fairview. And then at the meeting after that in September, we want to have that in Mountain View. And then at the meeting in November, we want to have that at the library. And, it'd take a while. It'd take a couple of years for people to realize this is going on in their community. But the idea is to make it easy for taxpayers and citizens to come to us and to know about our services, not put the burden on them, but to put the burden on us to go to them. And so what I hope to do is to invite the assembly members to these commission meetings in your neighborhoods and invite the neighborhood councils to participate. Because again, that's a way I can say, is there anybody my agency can help? How can we help your constituents? How can we help the neighborhood council members' constituents? This is what we do. We're here, et cetera. And we're right here. We're in your neighborhood if somebody wants to come and talk to us, et cetera. So those are kind of some of the things we're trying to do.
Sorry. So I find myself being the one running this work session while Mr. Constant is out. So thank you so much for your presentation and for all of the work that you've outlined, and really your attention to improving the culture of your department and supporting your staff, as well as thinking about how to reach out into the community. So thank you first. And then I'll see if others have questions or comments.
Yeah, and I did want to elaborate that I was in private practice for 26 years, and this whole government municipal world is very different for me. And so what I did when I came on board was I talked to HR and I said, I want to build a team. Can you help me? And I've been working with them from the beginning to learn how to effectively fit into this culture and communicate in the ways this culture communicates in. And, they've been doing their job of building teams for the municipality for years and years. And instead of me figuring out everything from scratch and going through trial and error, just let other people who know and do things teach me. And then I emulate what they're teaching. So.
Thank you. So I saw Mr. Rivera, Mr. Johnson, and then okay. Those two. So go ahead, Mr. Rivera.
Wonderful, thanks. So can you expand a little bit when you said you found that you had to negotiate quite a bit with HR, quote unquote, to fill the two vacant inspector positions or investigator
I
positions?
didn't have to negotiate with them. I just had to say, hey, I would like to hire this new investigator at a certain level. And I guess normally when people come on to the municipality, they come in at a certain level. And it was really important for me to let them know, if we're going to get this super highly qualified investigator, there's a certain form you use to inform HR that this person is more than qualified, and we should perhaps make a certain offer to him as opposed to a lower offer, because then we lose him. So it wasn't really a negotiation. It was just, okay, thank you.
Got
And
it.
we'll apply it.
Thanks. So then, am I assuming correctly just by what you're saying that that process wasn't a particularly cumbersome process?
No, not at all.
Okay.
HR has been super helpful to me, very helpful. Yeah.
Can I make a comment? So my understanding, there were 9 or 10 applicants for a position, and HR selected the 3 that would be interviewed by the executive director. So I think sometimes there's an issue with our hiring system where HR does all the screening without any input from the executives, from the directors. So I will tell you, because my office is all executives and it's part of the legislative branch, the last time I hired somebody, there were 15 applicants. I requested to see all applications, and I interviewed 12 people. And I will say, when I hired Miss McAlpine and when I hired Miss Ramirez-Zhang, I don't know if they would have met the minimum qualifications for the positions that HR sets. So HR sets these minimum qualifications. They decide who's qualified to be interviewed. So I think sometimes we potentially lose good applicants.
And I did something similar. I had that number of applicants, and then I just called HR and said, okay, I'm going to go through these people, but what's going on with these other people? And can I have access to them if I want? And they explained to me why they didn't meet their criteria or whatever. And I said, well, let me interview these 3 first. And then if I don't find a real crackerjack among these 3, maybe I'll just interview the rest. So, I did something similar, but it worked out because of the 3. One guy was really good.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Makes me a little sad to think we need you guys, but I'm really glad you're there doing the work that you do. I said it makes me a little sad that, discrimination is such a prevalent issue in this day and age and in our city that we need somebody like the Equal Rights Commission. But I really appreciate the work you guys do.
Yeah.
But I wanted to ask, and correct me, did I hear right that you said, I think it was 3 out of 4 investigators left around the beginning of the year?
Yes.
That seems like a lot. 75% of the staff. Any idea why there was this mass exodus?
I don't know personally, but there is no shortage of investigator jobs in this state. There are plenty of jobs. And, this is a new system. And I don't know. It'd just be speculation on my part. But, I just feel like challenges are always going to throw themselves at any agency. And I can sit around and wonder why, or cry about it, or shake my fist at the sky. But really, it's a waste of time. So I say, hey, thank you and best of luck to you as you move on to your next position. Please feel free to come back and visit us. Please feel free to attend our outreaches and continue your interest in equal rights. And then I go out and find somebody who can help keep this agency on track. So.
Okay. Yep, go ahead, Karen. Ms. Ms. Bronga.
I may have heard you wrong, but I kind of bristled when I heard something about you need to educate young women about harassment. And I would say that most women, young or old, completely understand harassment, that a good deal of the education needs to be on the people in positions of power that create these situations. I'm glad you're there for them, but I hope that there's an education component that really looks at the supervisors in City Hall and all over. And then I got another thing. This is kind of a weird one, but I used to work as a teacher, and one of the best ways to get your information out is on bathroom walls, restroom readers.
Sure.
That's where you spend a little bit of time sometimes, and you tend to
Yeah.
read things more often. And then if you wanted to get your educational materials to ASD, everything runs through the health
Okay.
supervisor, Melanie Sutton. And the health teachers run all the harassment, sexual harassment, and otherwise lessons. And I'm sure they would appreciate extra materials. So
Yes. And just to clarify, you're absolutely correct that it's not my job to educate young women about what harassment is. I was trying to say, I want to educate people that we exist and we're here for them and we're a resource for them, because, it's just kind of a really important topic, because every woman I've ever talked to has stories of sexual harassment. And my daughter just graduated from college, started her first job, left her first job because of sexual harassment issues. And, I just feel like we got to be proactive. We got to get out there and say, it's not the law. The law is you don't treat people like this. And the law is if you are treated like this, there is a place that you can go for assistance, because sometimes it falls in the gray area of it's not explicit enough or a big enough case that a private attorney is going to take it. It's not criminal enough that the police can do anything about it. And that's why we exist, because I can. The way you've written the law, it enables me to, get progress on that issue with the people in power, the people that are causing the problem. I can hold them accountable and say, you have to follow the laws of the city of Anchorage. And these are the penalties for it. And this is how you will make it right with this person that you or your organization is allowing it to happen to. So, but I can't help anybody if they don't know we exist. And I was a practicing attorney here for 26, 27 years. I'd never heard of the Equal Rights Agency or Commission. So I really need to get our name out.
Ms. Bobby.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by the idea of reaching out to businesses, or really all organizations beyond the
Yes.
municipality. And I could see the potential for, I guess, misaligned incentives depending on how, how basically pro-worker those organizations are, right?
Sure.
Where, and I think of my former employer, we had all of the required notices on the board for OSHA and all the other things that are required. And so, I would imagine many organizations would be very supportive of putting that up in their office, for example, even if we did require a sign. And then, of course, there's other organizations, I don't have any in mind, I'm just hypothetically, that would not be inclined to do that because they're either engaging in those practices or they have employees who are doing that and they are not necessarily willing to, step up and take responsibility for that. So I just wonder, I guess generally, what kinds of relationships do you have with organizations, especially recognizing as you're going through
So what
cases?
I've done is I've reached out to the Chamber of Commerce. I've reached out to Hope Community Center. I've reached out to the ARC of Anchorage. I reached out to the Alaska Native Justice Center. And surprisingly, all the business I've reached out to have said, yes, this is great. This is what we're trying to do, because it is a liability for us for people to violate the law. It is a liability for our company to violate the law. And it also is terrible public relations for our employees, our companies to violate the law. So we would much rather learn from you, learn about the law, meet with you now rather than on the other end of it in an enforcement action. People have been surprisingly receptive, and they've also been happy to share information about how they train their employees. Because again, I can look at all of this information and then provide examples to people who want to know from the best of the information instead of me trying to create it all. I mean, some of these employees have very intensive onboarding processes that go on for 7 days, and then they check in after the first week, they check in after 30 days. So there's a lot of great stuff out there, and there's a lot of people that care and want to promote business atmospheres of mutual respect. That's basically what anti-discrimination is. Be respectful to the people you work with and the people you interact with, customers, other companies, et cetera, because respect allows cooperation and success. Whereas you get a bunch of people in a company that are all disrespecting each other, disrespecting customers, disrespecting other companies that they work with, probably not going to be a very successful company. So.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And two takeaways that I get from that. One is the importance of education and encouraging compliance up front. I think and so it's great that organizations are interested in that. And the other is the power of the law that, you know, I'd like to think everybody wants to do the right thing just because, but also, like you said, the liability of potentially violating that law, it really, again, just says sometimes we do need to put things in the law. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we can't live in a society with no laws. There's too many of us. We all have to, you know, obey the law, do what we're supposed to do. And one of the things that's interesting is, you know, the partnerships with the federal agencies like the EEOC, they do massive studies on how to communicate better, how to educate better. And so I'm learning from them and putting some of their practices in, because one of the most recent studies is that the most effective way of ending discrimination and teaching about respect within the company is not making people sit in front of videos when they first get hired. People tend to zone out during the video and then they immediately forget it. What's important is from the top, making an environment where you can talk about it. So you'll bring it up in a performance review. Is this person creating an atmosphere of mutual respect for everybody else in the company? Because when you tie it to people getting a raise, when you tie it to people's wages going up, it's important. They're going to do what they need to do. And it's also important when you bring it up in monthly or weekly staff meetings. Are we promoting a culture of respect? Is anybody feeling discriminated against? Because that tells people that the company cares about it. They want to hear about it. And it also sends a message that this is the kind of environment we want to have. So. And I'm trying to do that with my own agency because it's a great place to test out these ideas in practice. And I find it surprisingly easy to, when we have a staff meeting, just check in with people about everybody feeling respected, et cetera.
Anyone else? So I think, I don't know, this is to both of you. You began your presentation by talking about having a substantial number of cases beyond the 240-day deadline. And we saw kind of a vacancy happen where lots of the investigators left and now we're rebuilding. Yes. So can we talk, both Daryl and Mr. Kim, Mr. Hess and Mr. Kim, about what got us there, what we're doing now to get us out of there, and kind of where we're going in the context of improving the process internally?
Great question. So Before I instituted my tracking system, there was no tracking system. There just wasn't. Cases came in and they got worked. And then you didn't have a set deadline from the date the case opened. And then there weren't regular meetings about where are we in terms of getting this case accomplished by the 240 days. So it's easy for people to get pulled off or super focused on one case. There also wasn't an explicit rule that all cases must be worked simultaneously. Most agencies consider, and the investigators carry a workload of about 50 to 70 cases. They feel that any investigator carrying more than 70 cases just can't be effective. It's just too many to manage. But up to 50 cases, an investigator should be picking up the file every single week and saying, what's the next thing I need to do in this case? So you have to put these expectations in place. And that's what I did. Before that, it was very much, it just wasn't structured enough, and there wasn't enough transparency and accountability. And so I put those in place. And so now, things are moving and we can see what's going on, and it keeps people on track.
I would say over the last few years, 4 years ago, the commission probably had 25 to 28% of cases were over 240. So the code says essentially that the cases should be completed by 240 days. But legal has opined to the commission in the past, the municipal attorney's office has opined that that's more of a guideline than a requirement based on certain court decisions. And I think that opinion was counterproductive. I think staff may have lost a certain sense of urgency when they heard, well, that is not a requirement in the code. But the commission over the last 2 or 3 years went from 25 to 28% over 240 to 50%. And commissioners started asking questions in 2022, asking the former executive director what is going on, and started raising concerns about the number of cases that were over 240. The former executive director accepted a new position in Des Moines, Iowa. Keoki was hired in August of last year. I was elected chair in January. And after I was elected chair, I met with Keoki. We discussed him reaching out to other agencies up and down the West Coast and on the Northwest to see what they're doing. And without exception, they all used a tracking sheet to track the cases. Matter of fact, I talked to Mitzi Anderson, our former executive director, and her office in Des Moines uses the same tracking sheet that Keoki implemented. So we discussed the tracking sheet. He implemented it. He worked with HR to meet with the investigators when the tracking sheet was implemented. And based on conversations I've had with current investigators, they believe that the tracking sheet is an invaluable tool to keep them on track. So if you look at the number of cases, 28 cases were closed recently. That's probably as many cases that were closed in a much more extended period of time last year. So the number of closures are increasing. A new investigator was hired, 6 weeks ago. He's hit the ground running. He's doing a great job. Another investigator will be starting in a week or two. And as Keoki said, he's an attorney. He has investigative experience. He's originally from Alaska, and he wants to move back to Alaska. And so I personally, having been a commissioner for a while, I believe the commission is going through a rebuilding phase that many organizations go through. And I will say, with a change in executive director and a change in office operations, change is probably the most difficult thing for human beings. And it hasn't been an easy transition, but talking with the current staff, they are positive, they are upbeat, and they think the commission is on the right course to continue rebuilding to better serve the public.
So I am going to follow up though with the question, just because cases are getting closed, I don't know that that means something good is happening or the right thing is happening, because I've heard stories that there are cases that are closed that staff had uniformly agreed more should be done, but there was an executive determination or some other factor where cases may have just been closed without going through the due process that should have been applied. And then we have now a number of legal cases that are starting to circulate, and I don't want to get into any specifics about those,
Sure.
but they just present a different picture about the workflow. And now some of those, I have read some materials and decided for myself that they're pretty loose with facts, but that's to be adjudicated by someone other than myself. So really getting back to my main point, the question is, are we really closing them because they have been found to be by reasonable people not worthy of investigating further, or things have been done to make the conditions better? Or is it an administrative process to clear the records with the best?
So I actually know the cases you're talking about. One, I think, had been open 1,200 days and one had been open 1,400. I think there was the previous executive director was on the fence regarding those cases. So the way it works, the staff makes a recommendation. They go to the executive director, who is also the staff attorney, and the executive director makes the final determination. So in this case, a couple of cases I know Mr. Kim disagreed with the decision of the investigator. He actually
of half the investigators.
Okay, but he went to legal. Legal reviewed the case files, and two different attorneys in legal opined that we would not prevail on appeal. So the cases were closed. So that's one instance. And I know the other instance, you're talking about a lawsuit. I actually referred that former employee to the Equal Rights Commission. I know the employee. And 12 months later, she forwarded me an email chain from the investigator who had been assigned. This is 12 months after she filed her complaint. And the investigator she was asking for an update. And the investigator told her, I might get around to opening the investigation next month, which would have been the 13th month. But if you'd like to, you can withdraw your complaint. Well, of course, at that point in time, it was too late to go to another enforcement agency. The deadlines to file had passed. So I found that very troubling that the case was 12 months old and the investigator hadn't started the investigation. So yes, there have been some valid concerns regarding the Equal Rights Commission. And it's not that the commission isn't investigating employee complaints or investigating complaints related to sexual orientation or gender identity, as was alleged in a recent letter to the Assembly. It's that there was not timely initiation of some investigations.
Yes, and you have to understand that, so the office has 4 investigators and 1 executive director. It's going to be rare that you can get 5 people to agree on what should happen in a case. I mean, as you guys know, when you're trying to solve problems, getting a complete and utter consensus at all time is impractical and often impossible. And so that's why within my agency, somebody has the final say. Okay, we've all looked at this, we've all thought about it, we've all talked about it, we've brainstormed it, we disagree, we've got 3 people that are yay, 2 people that are nay. Who's going to make the final say? And this agency wasn't set up as like decisions are made by a majority. This agency was set up as the attorney who is going to have to take the case and conciliate it or do a hearing on it or apply the hearing process of it, is going to make the final decision, which is me, which makes sense because the investigators are charged with gathering the information and then making a recommendation. And then I have to evaluate that case based upon Title V on what does it meet the standards an attorney can use to win or lose at hearing, right? But there are safeguards. So if I make a decision on a certain case, that complainant can ask that the consideration, my decision be reconsidered. And then it goes to a panel of 3 commissioners. They look at all the evidence, and then they say, we agree with Keoki or we disagree. So there are safeguards in place.
Is that safeguard process eligible for everybody?
Yes.
And is it on the website?
And no, when we send out the decision, it's on the paper
That's
that you,
interesting.
if you disagree with this decision, you can ask for reconsideration and a panel of 3 commissioners, et cetera.
That's very interesting. One thing I would note for the
If,
record,
if the panel doesn't grant reconsideration, they can appeal to the Superior Court.
always that right. Yeah.
I mean, checks and balances are very important, which brings me to another issue. I've asked Daryl has, and I have asked that the municipal auditor audit my agency, because I'd like for him to come in, and we're on the schedule for 2024, go through everything we do and give us feedback. And then I also ask him, once you audit us the first time, will you please just schedule a regular audit every 2 years? Because it should be easy if we get everything lined up, everything on track, any little new things that come up, so it doesn't turn into a complete train wreck before we correct it. And part of my job in working with the auditing department is to tell them, this is what you ought to look at to see if an executive director is performing, to see if his staff is performing, to see if the agency is performing. Because I know the questions he should be asking to determine if the person in my position is doing their job. Because again, checks and balances are so important. Transparency and accountability is so important.
Okay. So, and I would note that actually more than half, 2/3, maybe 3/4 of our work is done by unanimous consent. So with 12 people with completely different opinions, it's amazing how much consensus drives our work. Any last comments? We have about 5 minutes. Last questions, anyone? I'm not seeing anyone.
I did want to say that the commissioners also requested, we had Megan Carmichael, Assistant Municipal Attorney, who provides us legal advice and has worked with us, that we requested through her that HR start conducting exit interviews in the future for exiting AERC staff, and that the commissioners be provided with those exit interviews.
Yeah, and the last thing I wanted to do was earlier, late last year, earlier this year, I sent out an email to each of you asking if I could come meet with you and perhaps explain to your staff or your constituents what we do. So when you get calls that my agency might be able to handle, they can send them on to me. And I am always open to, if you want to come by and visit and talk about how my agency is run, you have more questions. Because again, any feedback is good feedback. I can say, well, that's a misunderstanding or that's a misconception. Or I can say, hey, you've got a good point there. It's something we ought to change. So please feel free to come by my agency and meet with me or have me come out to your offices.
Okay. Anyone else? Hearing, seeing none. Thank you for your time. This work session is over.
Thank you, sir.